Hi everybody, welcome. I've got a bin here that needs to be fed. It's I think it's something in the neighborhood of about a 53-day-old bin, and it's been 12 days since the last time the bin was fed. It might be its 5th feeding or 6th feeding or something, maybe not even that many. Pretty young bin still. In fact, I think it is my youngest bin. It's the bin that I kind of restarted. It's the reason that the bin has this kind of weird arrangement of stickers on the side where the original start date of the bin is still depicted with the top sticker that's been crossed out, but then there were all kind of issues going on in a number of my bins, and this bin seemed like it was also preparing to crash and burn, and I kind of did a quick ditch effort to try to rescue the worms and to rebuild all the bedding in the bin here. And on the day that I placed in part of what makes up the bin's current new bedding, I had treated that as the bin's relaunch date, basically. So this is, I guess, basically a bin that narrowly averted the crash and burn situation that a lot of my other bins experienced recently. So the food I've got sitting here for these little guys is, it might look a little bit more haggard than the food that they usually get. Usually the frozen foods that I feed my bins gets frozen once, but this stuff all got frozen twice. So my freezer, if some of you have been on my channel for the past few days, you'll know that I was on vacation, and when I got back from vacation, the freezer was left open. The door was left open about this much, allowing for pretty much everything to thaw out, and a lot of stuff just ended up in the outdoor compost barrel. But I did try to salvage a bunch of stuff that had already been frozen once before and had now thawed and was now frozen again for the second time. So I'm sure that is definitely going to contribute to the accelerated breakdown of the materials. Although, a lot of the stuff that you see in here is stuff that would break down pretty rapidly anyway, such as these pieces of watermelon rinds. There's a piece of cucumber down here, I believe. Almost everything that's been frozen and thawed has a tendency to break down pretty quickly in the worm bins. The only thing in here that was not frozen is the coffee out of the coffee machine. So when I reset the coffee machine last night, this was the stuff that came out of it. So besides the food that they're getting, I got an assortment of different types of bedding I'm going to be including with today's feeding. Being really generous with the bedding has been my theme lately. And every time I feed, I always include a whole bunch of bedding nowadays. We'll be doing the same here today. I did actually review the video from the last feeding that this bin received 12 days ago. I reviewed it last night, and I'm a little bit hard-pressed to remember what it consisted of. I do remember using a bunch of toilet paper tubes, so you could see one of them right there. I think there was avocado included in the feeding. There was probably coffee. So I'll be curious to see how the feeding from 12 days ago is holding up. Let's see what we can see if we go rummaging around in here. See how many of the foods that they got last time are still remaining here as leftovers. This right here would have been fed not last time, but I believe the time prior. It's the way I've been processing corn cobs lately. So I take the entire corn cob and then I chop it up into these little segments. And it does help with the breakdown. So I think as far as leftovers concerned, corn cob bits are something that you would normally expect to see as leftovers in your worm bin for numerous weeks after the time that they get applied. And it's actually breaking down pretty quickly if you consider how long corn cobs normally take. To see it breaking down that far in only the time of about 3 weeks, that's pretty darn good. So now it's starting to come back to me. We had thrown in some chunks of avocado, and I believe that this whole avocado had been in here from the previous feeding. So last time we came in here to feed, this was still in here as leftovers. And it does look like they've made their way in there. If I peek in through some of these little holes that are on the side of the avocado, I could see worms that have made their way down into it. And the ones that are just sitting out here already, easy access, wide open, also have worms hanging out in them. If you just peel back some of the material, you could see worms right down there within the fleshy part of the avocado. Same story here. Avocado does tend to be a pretty popular food item in the worm bins. I think that those things were kind of expected to be leftovers. This looks like it's the very end of a corn cob. You can even see some of the husk. I'm sure we'll hit a few more of those as we go in here. And the other thing that we're going to probably see a bunch of leftovers of is the abundant bedding that I've been using lately. Just that when I find a jumble of it matted together like this, I try to see if I can sort of tear it up a little bit and help aerate it. I always like to recycle the bedding stuff that I pull out of the feeding area while I'm inspecting it and just get it right back down into the feeding area so it can continue with the breakdown process. This bin, it's really hard to estimate how many worms occupy this bin. Since it was kind of a rescue effort, I guess I call it a rescue effort because I do know that there was a good number of worms that were already succumbing to the environment that was rapidly degrading. So I know that I probably lost a good few hundred worms in the tainted material that I ended up extracting out of here. And I did fish a good number of the worms out of that material to try to rescue them and return them to their family and back into this bin and the fresh bedding that the bin was set up with. Here's another piece of corn cob. And, you know, after 40, 50 days, who knows? There could have been cocoons in here. There could be baby worms that have hatched since then. So it's a combination of the worms that I kind of rescued out of the so-so material that they used to inhabit, possibly combined with some new worms that may have recently been hatched. So my hope is that by providing the worms with a whole bunch of space, lots of bedding, lots of room to roam around in, that they'll do their part to try to occupy that space with more and more baby worms. There we got a little worm that's trying to escape. Let's make sure they don't end up on the table or on the floor. So there's no big jumble of worms. Sometimes when you have certain types of food items or certain things in the bin, sometimes you stumble on a nice big wad of worms all kind of going nuts around that item. But we didn't really encounter that today. After 12 days, I'm sure if there was any food items that would have caused that kind of reaction, those things probably got gobbled up in the first week. So now they're all just kind of scattering, looking for other things in the bin that are, you know, nourishing, but maybe not stuff that gets them really jazzed and excited. So we've opened up a pretty good hole down here, and it's a little bit difficult to do that, you know. I'm pushing everything up to the side and I'm practically spilling out the sides. That's the reason I'm kind of doing it gingerly and carefully, because I don't want to spill stuff out the sides. I'm sure some of this stuff has already spilled out the sides. But I think we're in good shape now to apply the food. Last time I was down here yesterday to feed, I tapped out my paper supply and I didn't even have any leaves to use as bedding, but I've since gone outside and replenished my leaf supplies. My leaf box is full, and I just got done shredding a whole bunch of junk mail. A whole bunch of supermarket flyers. So I'm back in business with a whole bunch of bedding materials here too. So I'm going to grab a handful of paper, maybe a handful of leaves, and I'm trying to see if I can come up with some way to combine the leaves and the paper in such a way that you don't end up with just this matted up, jumbled up pile of paper. My hope is that I can include leaves that sort of make their way in between the sheets of shredded paper and prevent the matting of the paper up against itself. And, you know, hopefully results in a little bit of more airy kind of bedding, as opposed to bedding that just sort of ends up as a big block of, or wad of paper. I'm always trying different things out here. And I think 2 handfuls of paper, 2 handfuls of fresh leaves. To me, that seems like a pretty good foundation to lay today's feeding in on. I think before we proceed, let's just see if we can return some of these food items that we encountered on the way in. All these avocados and this mango seed. And I don't know, I think there were some corn cob bits here and there. I usually try to keep the food down low so I don't have food floating around on the top surface of the bin. And then besides the food bits that we encountered on the way in that we pulled out and checked out, let's also return some of these older bits of bedding too into the hole before we come in here with today's fresh feeding. So today's feeding is not only these food bits, but you can see a couple additional pieces of bedding, a couple soiled napkins underneath the food itself that are going to go in with the food. I tried to chop all this stuff apart because it was all really kind of one large block, and I hit it with the knife and I tried to separate it into individual chunks of food so I don't just come down here with one large block of ice or frozen food, so to speak. So it's pretty nice feeding. Banana, carrots, carrot peels, watermelon, I think another banana peel over here. Mostly stuff that the worms would normally really enjoy. Oh yeah, the piece of cucumber that we saw earlier too. It's not really that big of a feeding, but I don't know if this bin really requires such a heavy feeding, because I don't know if the population in this bin is really that high. So this might be a perfectly well-suited sized feeding. I'm adding a little bit of grit, which is in my case pulverized eggshell particles, and then this coffee. Sprinkle that right over the top. That's a pretty good feeding. Yeah, after 12 days, I'm sure they're going to be happy to receive a little bit of fresh food. I mean, those mangoes, that mango seed, and those avocados seemed like they were doing okay, as were the corn cob bits that we found. But I always like kind of combining some of these older bits of food that compost slowly with, you know, a fresh portion of quicker, easier to eat foods, and maintain a good combination of both types for the worms to enjoy. So we can maybe use some of these older seasoned leaves to cover up our feeding with, because I've got more leaves and I think I'll apply more to cover up the overall top of the bin. I like my bins to have this nice sort of natural appearance across the top when possible, so I like to take all these things with ink on them and shrapnels of paper and all that stuff and kind of submerge them out of view so that when it's all said and done it has kind of a natural look to it. I'm sure there's worms all over the place. One thing we didn't really get a chance to do was look around on the outer edges of the bin. I think we'll take a quick peek to see how things look on the outer edges, since the first thing we did when we got in here was we went straight for the middle, open up a spot for the feeding. Why don't we take a peek to see how things look out on the edges before we cover up and put away. There's a lot of nice castings down here, that's for sure. Kind of like a leaf moldy sort of material. A lot of small particles of leaves falling apart, mingled with a whole bunch of castings throughout it. Although I would say at this point it's still probably a higher concentration of bedding type materials, leaves and whatnot, than the castings. But, you know, in time it'll certainly change. It'll break down a lot and it'll become all castings. Certain things take a little time. These toilet paper tubes, all these things take a little longer. Make sure that they're submerged below the surface before we cover up. We've got leaves. We'll be able to cover up the whole shebang with fresh leaves so that even if there's a couple chunks of paper, cardboard, whatever, floating out on the surface, we can cover them up and give the whole thing a nice look. Let's see how things appear on this outer edge. Very much the same. The consistency is very similar. Seems like we might have a few more worms hanging out in this stuff over here. Really nice. I know that it's a lot of it is still leaf particles and cardboard and paper bits, but it certainly seems like it's coming along nicely. I always like to sort of stir it all up a little bit, aerate it all. I don't always remember to do that. I mean, I am a kind of a curious worm farmer, so I always do tend to look around most of my bins most of the time. But once in a while I forget to do certain aspects of the bin inspection. But I think this time we got a chance to check out mostly every bit of the bin, and everything looks quite nice everywhere within this system. I'm glad we added like 2 handfuls of leaves, 2 handfuls of shredded paper. I already sense that we've kind of built up the overall volume of the system here a little bit by doing so. And we're going to do even more. We're going to just go ahead and sprinkle the whole top down with a nice coating of fresh leaves. Stuff which maybe after another week or 2 of being in the bin might be considered as seasoned and ready to go down into the feeding area. And then we'll replace it with even more. Alright. Nice spacious bin, even if it's not a lot of worms. Giving them a lot of room to roam around in. Perhaps inspiring them to try to fill the empty space with more and more baby worms. Huh, the glove is so nice and clean, it almost seems like I won't have to wash it off when I'm done here. And we are done here. I'm just going to cover this up. This kind of shows where we last fed. And my coverings are just consisting of a sheet of newspaper and a sheet of cardboard. And as you can see, it's keeping the moisture in quite nicely, almost perfect, almost the right level. I've gotten myself used to seeing my bins a lot more damp, but more recently I've been transitioning to keeping my bins a lot more dry, a lot more flaky and loose, a lot more airy. So I think this is really what I'm starting to consider as my new standard for running a worm bin. All right, everyone, that's pretty much it. I've got a couple things to put away and to clean up, but I'm not going to keep you around for that because that's boring. But before I go, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye.